Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
We're going into your final week. You only have to go to school for one more week.
Teacher tired.
Teacher tired.
We're recording this on Sunday.
We are?
So this is my last Sunday scary until August.
Yep.
At the time of this release, I'll have 2 days in graduation. That'll be done.
A big celebration on the horizon for you.
It's almost here.
Are you close with this outgoing senior class? Is this the last group of kids
Who
that
were
had
these
the
people?
pandemic?
I'm trying to remember who these people were. These were freshmen. The return from COVID year.
Oof.
So they were in 8th grade when COVID hit.
I will bet that this was a difficult bunch. Mm-hmm. Just because of having to come back and try to act like everything was normal.
This class is distant as a whole. They have left the high school largely. A lot of them are at our career institute and a lot of them are at local universities. So
do you feel like they've struggled to form a kind of community bond in ways that other classes might have been able to just because of the...
I think so.
Yeah.
I think freshman year with all those limitations was probably really hard.
I would bet. The jump from middle school to high school is hard to do anyway, and I can't imagine trying to do that remotely.
Yeah.
That would be tricky.
Well, I mean, we were in person, but they just didn't get, they didn't get a freshman homecoming. I don't think they got a freshman winter formal.
So a lot of events.
They missed out.
Did they have
on,
big? I was gonna say, didn't they miss out on big concerts and?
They missed out on student section and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they have been
stuff that builds community. They haven't had as much.
They had a hard time with that, and they're a very bright bunch. If you were to look at them by the numbers, very very smart group, but a very disengaged group.
Interesting.
I like them as people. Like the kids I had, I enjoyed. But yeah, they're almost out of here. I am almost out of here.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to sleep the first week.
Yeah. Is that all you're going to do the first week? Just sleep?
I'm going to do that in adult things.
Adult things?
I need to get, my oil changed. That's on my list.
The chores you put off?
Yeah, because, that's a chore that's, hard during the school year. So I need to do that. We're going to have a yard sale. So adult things.
Yeah.
Just adult things. But it'll be nice just to have time to sleep and probably get in the pool.
Cool. Before we hit our education news headline roundup, I just want to throw a reminder out there to sign up for our 16 to 1 podcast email newsletter. You can find that on our website, spell it all out, 16to1.com. You'll get the news announcements, episode announcements, resources, workshop offerings, stuff like that from Moonbeam Multimedia. That's us. Are you ready for news headlines?
Yes.
What's going on around the world?
There's a lot going on around the world.
There sure is.
More than there needs to be.
Yeah.
I might offer. You want to start?
I would love to start. I want to start here in Ohio, and I'm
this
sure
one hurts a lot.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure you're going to have color to add to this one because it is so close to home. But here's the latest.
Not in the good ways.
Over the past few weeks, there have been some big developments at the state teachers retirement system of Ohio. In March, this was the more normal thing. This is what you had mentioned on a previous episode. But in March, the board approved changes for active educators, including lowering the service year requirements and updating healthcare subsidy reimbursements. I was reading, was it in 2012 that they switched from 30 to 35 years for retirement?
Yeah, the year I graduated from college.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they
smacked with that.
Upped it by 5 years, and now they've reduced it by 1 year. So it's 34 years. Yeah. Do you think that'll make a huge difference or no?
Hey, 8 years a year. We'll take what we can get.
We'll take a year. Okay, so we shaved off a year in March. The announcement about all of that, though, even though that was a pretty big deal for a lot of teachers in Ohio, was clouded by this very strange and developing situation of the governor getting involved with STRS. There's this legal battle going on. So Mike DeWine removed a STRS board member, Wade Steen, before the end of his term. And the governor cited concerns that Steen's attendance record was not great and that he was advocating for an investment firm at the expense of a thorough and transparent process. So the governor removes this guy. He goes and gets a court order to be reinstated. He comes back to the April meeting. I think he just like marches in with the court order. It's very dramatic. There's this tense situation. They abruptly adjourn the meeting. You can actually go find the meeting minutes and you can read them, and it's just like, and we're done.
Yeah.
Because it's too tense in here.
Adjourn.
Yeah, it's
Seconded.
just like, bye. So then on May 15th, just this week, Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost initiates an investigation into allegations of a hostile takeover attempt of the $90 billion pension fund by QED Systematic Solutions. We'll talk more about them. But he then files a lawsuit seeking to remove Wade Steen, again, and Rudy Fichtenbaum, claiming that they have breached their responsibilities to protect the fund and teachers' interests. Okay, so this QED Systematic Solutions, they're supposedly recommending this investment strategy that is kind of untested, and they're asking the STRS board, for a ton of money to go try relatively untested method of making money. Now, the reason there's a call for reform on how STRS handles money is because over the last several years, the Ohio Teacher Retirement Fund has lost tons of money. They were invested
lots and lots,
like billions, and there was like, what was it? There was a couple billion lost one year.
Like $5 billion 1 year, and then another.
They also were invested in Silicon Valley Bank, which failed. That big startup bank that failed. So they were invested with Silicon Valley Bank.
That's my money.
Yeah, your money.
That's my money.
Yeah. So there's an understandable call for reform going on. The problem is that the people who are in the reformer side of this camp are now tied up with this QED company. I can't really tell from the outside what is going on with QED. It sounds a little suspect to me, but at the same time, a lot of people are saying, well, if we're going to get down to who's being really suspect in this situation, all eyes are going to be on the governor's office anyway. And like the Ohio Federation of Teachers even came out and said something like, be careful about politically motivated things, which kind of sounds like a defense of the QED strategy, but maybe isn't, because they're just saying, oh, hey, maybe these politicians aren't as trustworthy as they're making themselves out to be. And the Ohio governor's office has some ties to the First Energy corruption case that also happened here, which is like a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme that implicated a couple of different Ohio state politicians. So anyway, that's just the political backdrop against which all of this is unfolding. The other thing that makes this story a little bit suspect is that the governor's office initiated these investigations after they were delivered some anonymous dossier from supposedly maybe prepared by STRS employees, but again, anonymous. And the timing is weird. Everyone's like, why are they just now getting involved? Yeah. So I guess I would just say, if you're in Ohio and you're a teacher or you're adjacent to education, or you care about investing in education into the future, you might want to keep your eyes on what's going on with STRS and what the governor's office is doing. Getting more details as this unfolds, but it sounds very complicated.
And if you are a teacher in Ohio and you are on Facebook, there are a couple of groups dedicated to this work. And if you wanted to write in to the podcast and email us, I would let you know the names of those groups to join.
hello@16to1.com, all spelled out.
What a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Another mess.
Another mess?
Here we go.
Okay.
So academic publishing is facing a crisis of credibility as journals are closing and thousands of retractions are issued in the wake of a huge rise in fake research papers.
Yeah.
So there was a study completed by Nature, and they found that in 2013, there were just over 1,000 retractions, compared to in 2022, there were 4,000. And then in 2023, more than 10,000 retractions.
Yikes.
So one reason for the rise in these sham papers is rooted in a need for scientists and doctors to have published papers in order to be promoted.
Yeah.
Another is the rise of generative artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, which is enabling academic paper mills to turn out low quality or bogus research at an unprecedented rate. Paper mills producing these fake papers can be found in China, Iran, India, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Eastern Europe. And part of what made these fake papers possible is that a lot of them would be published in a special edition print, which didn't always require the same level of consideration, and they were often viewed by guest editors. So things are more likely to get through.
Interesting.
And if you've worked with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, you'll understand why this is comical. But what ended up tipping people off to this use of type of publishing were phrases that struck people basically as just being like, why would they, why are these words coming like this? And all of these links are in the show notes. But The Guardian had a story about this, and they quoted as saying references to bosom peril rather than breast cancer.
Oh, no.
And Parkinson's ailment instead of Parkinson's disease.
Okay. I mean, that sounds like somebody put something in Google Translate and that's what came out.
Right.
Yeah.
But that paired with ChatGPT, you can see why these phrases started catching people as like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, we don't call breast cancer bosom peril.
I don't.
No. So I just love that it kind of gave itself away.
Bosom peril.
Yeah. Okay. So more than 8,000 of the retractions came from an Egyptian company called Hindawai, which is a subsidiary of Wiley. The Hindawai brand will be sunsetted and its properties absorbed into Wiley. As of May 15th, Inside Higher Ed reported that Wiley has announced that they will close 19 journals because of the rise of fake papers, and that they alone had retracted more than 11,000 studies in the past 2 years.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Ugh. We keep talking about this. I mean, generative AI is making this, I think, is just increasing the clip of this problem, but there's still a fundamental issue to begin with, and that's just with the broken academic publishing model that we have.
Well, and the rat race of needing to be published to progress in your field. But if we're pushing people at the rate that this is suggesting we are, then they're not doing the necessary work to actually earn, right? Or be like qualified to receive these positions. So it's kind of a scary cycle that we're encouraging, because these people are being promoted because of these fake papers.
So there's still a reason to need to fake them.
So like, that's what's scary is like, if these are your doctors, you want them to have done the thing, not just write about bosom peril and hope they'll help you. Like,
I always remember this was a big debate that happened at my undergraduate college because they didn't require professors to publish there's also not really advancement in the traditional sense there, but they don't, a lot of, research universities obviously require publishing requirements for faculty members. And on the one hand, it makes sense because you want them to be contributing to the academic field in which they're supposedly experts or whatever. You want some evidence that your university attracts, high quality people who produce high quality thinking and research. But you have to start to ask if this model that we have is the way to do it when you look at how easily abused the system is. Yeah, I just think we need to start asking ourselves some tough questions about whether we're going about this the right way. So, okay, our last headline in the roundup is going to be about a familiar name. This is not the first or even the second time that we are talking about this person. We are talking about the state-appointed superintendent of Houston Independent School District, Mike Miles. He's managed to boil himself yet another pot of hot water in which to rest. There's a report out by Spectrum News from May 14th alleging that millions of dollars in Texas taxpayer funds intended for a charter school in Odessa were instead diverted to supporting struggling Third Future Charter Schools network in Colorado, of which Miles is founder and with whom he has recently maintained a consulting relationship. The report claimed that large administrative fees were paid from the Texas school to Third Future's central office in Colorado. Miles has denied allegations of impropriety, stating that the administrative fees were standard practice for charter networks and that Third Future's finances were properly audited and approved across multiple states and districts. The Houston Federation of Teachers president called the alleged fund diversion an outrageous betrayal of trust, demanded Miles' resignation, and a federal criminal investigation. For his part, Miles has called the Spectrum News report irresponsibly inaccurate. The Texas Education Agency stated it was reviewing the matter, but later provided context that Third Future was considered a vendor to Texas districts under state law, not a state-funded charter, giving it spending flexibility under certain contracts. I was trying to
Yikes.
read. Yeah, I was trying to read about this, and nobody seems to be denying that money did indeed go to the charter network. Like there's tons of money going to the charter network. It sounds like the charter network is operating a school in Texas.
Okay.
I think no matter how you slice it, you still walk away looking like there's a conflict of interest.
For sure.
Like, so even if the funds were kind of properly accounted for by the letter of the law, it still seems like one could leverage some criticism toward Mike Miles because he obviously has still an interest, a vested interest in this charter network.
Sure.
And it seems like part of the issue here is outsized administrative fees.
Go figure.
Yeah. Which charter network, not all that surprising. Also, this charter network had kind of been struggling in Colorado, which is another facet of this story. At the very least, it feels to me like this is ethically shaky, even if it's not legally shaky. And I think we need to see more reporting, more context beyond what was provided in just this original report. It doesn't look great for Mike Miles, who is already unpopular. There's students planning walkouts. For
multiple reasons,
yeah. This is the same guy who, from our earlier stories, converted libraries into detention centers and also fired a bunch of really popular principals
and they fought
in
back.
the district. And parents and teachers and community members have been asking for the state to remove this guy basically since he showed up. We'll have to keep an eye on this and see as the story develops. We saved the conversation with the biggest burden for the teacher in the room for the very end of the year, just so you could go out with a bang.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your consideration of me during this trying time.
Hey, I did try to pick a different topic for this week, but you said it was okay. So we're going to be talking about high-stakes standardized testing.
I'm full of regret.
Full of regret?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we decided what better way to welcome summer than to talk about standardized testing.
High stakes testing specifically, yes. And we're going to talk about No Child Left Behind just in a very high level way here, but we have a whole entire episode on No Child Left Behind, which is really the big legislative event that produced a high stakes standardized testing regime in the United States, at least, in the kind of contemporary timeline. We're going to jump into it. We're going to have a discussion, see where things are, what research has evolved around high stakes testing, and then just start to envision a little bit about what a future of less high stakes testing might look like.
Oh, a dream.
A dream. So why don't you set us up if you wouldn't mind?
So this starts in the early 2000s with the implementation of No Child Left Behind in 2001, and No Child Left Behind is often just called NCLB by teachers and educators.
We love an acronym.
We just need one more. NCLB mandated annual standardized testing in reading and math for students in grades 3 through 8, and once in high school. These tests were used to measure adequate yearly progress, AYP, for schools, and schools that failed to meet AYP targets face significant sanctions, including potential state takeovers or closures.
Yeah.
Although NCLB passed with wide majorities in both the House and the Senate, not all elected officials were on board. So at the time, the then Republican House member Mike Pence of Indiana voted against NCLB, viewing the law as an unwarranted federal intrusion into education policy that should be left to the states. On the other side of the American political aisle was Vermont then Representative Bernie Sanders, who also voted against NCLB. In a 2020 story in the Washington Post, he explained this opposition stemmed from concerns that high-stakes standardized testing would not improve American schools. We love a time when Mike Pence and Bernie Sanders were like,
I know.
What was happening 23 years ago? What a time to be alive.
When I looked back on this, I was just like, wow.
That's amazing.
What? Okay, and the other thing that really surprised me about that was how bipartisan the support for No Child Left Behind was. It passed with flying colors.
Right.
Wide majorities. And I was like, okay, first of all, we don't pass any legislation with those margins anymore. Wow.
Yeah.
And second of all, the fact that many people felt that this was a good idea.
Worthwhile.
I think what we have seen is that on this issue, Bernie might have been right in that standardized testing, high stakes standardized testing, it does provide us with, standardized scores, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the theme over and over again of this episode. It's like the tension between wanting a standardized way of knowing what our schools are doing for our students, and yet in our testing regime, utterly failing to help our students.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So high stakes tests, as mandated by NCLB and later reinforced by programs like Race to the Top in 2009, these place significant consequences on the results of standardized tests. These consequences can affect school funding, teacher evaluations, and student advancement. And so the Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA, of 2015 sought to reduce some of those pressures by decoupling test scores from high-stakes consequences, allowing states more flexibility in how they use student testing data.
Yeah.
I worked in a school that received a lot of funding from Race to the Top, and it became a rat race, 100%. It was like, what data can we give to support this, this, and this so that we can get this money? Like, it was a wild time when that money popped in.
Yeah.
So it really changed the way a lot of, especially Appalachian schools, received money.
I interned at a nonprofit at the time that was dealing with allocating state funds for Race to the Top. And it was a very interesting time. It was a mad scramble to get these education dollars. And
it was still in place in like 2013. When I was student teaching and that year following, they were still receiving that money. So it was like a 4 or 5 year thing that happened.
Yeah. So what problems are high stakes tests attempting to solve? Because I don't think that standardized tests are actually bad just by themselves. I think that they become bad because of the way we try to use the data from them.
I mean, they're designed to hold schools, teachers, and students accountable, right, for the educational outcomes. And so that idea is that by measuring student performance, stakeholders can identify which schools are performing well and which need some improvement. They aim to create a standardized metric to compare student performance across different schools and district. And this standardization is supposed to ensure that all students, regardless of where they live, are receiving a similar quality of education.
Yeah, and we've talked about stuff like grade inflation and things like that. Like, we have reasons to need a standardized way to evaluate student progress. Okay.
They're intended to highlight achievement gaps between different groups of students, such as those based on race, socioeconomic status, and disability. And so by identifying these gaps, policymakers hope to direct resources and interventions where they're most needed. And then by setting high expectations and linking consequences to performance, high-stake tests aim to drive improvements in teaching and learning. The underlying belief is that pressure will motivate schools and teachers to improve their instructional practices and thus enhance student learning outcomes.
You sound a little skeptical about that.
I'm a little skeptical about it.
What do you think about that? Do you think they accomplished that goal?
No.
Go figure.
Okay. Why are they failing?
Yeah.
Let's jump to that.
Yeah.
That's a perfect segue.
Let's get into it. Why are high stakes tests not achieving what they are setting out to achieve? So one of the major criticisms of high stakes testing is that it narrows the curriculum. And you can gut check me on all of these and let me know if I'm way off base. But the idea here is that teachers often feel pressured to teach to the test, so they end up focusing predominantly on subjects and skills that are tested at the expense of broader, more holistic education. And there are all kinds of reasons why this can stifle creativity and critical thinking in the classroom. High stakes tests obviously create significant stress and anxiety.
Oh, I'm familiar with this.
Are you, as a tested subject teacher, familiar with the pressure created
I have no
by
anxiety.
Okay.
Zero.
So both students and teachers can deal with that pressure to perform well on those tests.
They can deal with it, but we don't.
You don't deal with it at all.
I don't deal with it. I just suffer.
You acknowledge it. You embrace it.
No.
Okay. High stakes tests aim to identify and close achievement gaps, but they can sometimes exacerbate them, as it turns out.
Yeah.
So students from underprivileged backgrounds may lack resources and support needed to perform well on these tests, which leads to lower scores and then just perpetuating cycles of disadvantage. Schools in affluent areas may have more resources to invest in test prep, which widens the gap. And this does happen. I mean, it's not just a may, it actually does happen. So there's ongoing debate about whether high stakes tests can actually lead to improved educational outcomes. Critics argue that these tests measure only a narrow range of skills and knowledge and do not capture important aspects of learning, such as critical thinking, creativity, and social emotional development. And furthermore, the focus on testing can detract from other important educational activities. And then this one was interesting, and it did come up in our conversation about Varsity Blues, our episode on that. But the logistics of administering high-stakes tests can be challenging and costly. There are issues with test validity and reliability, as well as concerns about security and the potential for cheating. These implementation issues can undermine the effectiveness and credibility of high-stakes testing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Aside from some of these issues about administration and things like that, it seems like we don't have a firm grip on what it is that is actually being measured with a high stakes test. We think that it's teacher performance and student achievement, but maybe it is actually
greater than that.
The wealth of your parents, the availability of tutoring. Do you have time to do your homework? Do you have to have a job? Do you have to babysit your siblings? Those
or your
things.
Cousins?
Yeah.
Do you have to care for a sick someone?
I'm going to continue to struggle with the idea that we are using a number as a hinge when it comes to teacher evaluation. That number does not have a one-to-one relationship with your performance as a teacher. That's what it really comes down to me, is that we're evaluating you by a student's performance that does have something to do with how well you teach, but also has something to do with all of these other factors over which you exercise minimal control. So, yeah, the challenge is real. This is not an easy thing to figure out. So let's talk about what some of the latest research is saying about high-stakes testing.
So I found an article that was published in January of 2024, and it's called The Pernicious Predictability of State-Mandated Tests of Academic Achievements in the U.S., and it's by Maroon and Tinkin.
Okay.
So I'm going to be talking about that. And so before we jump into that, though, it is worth noting that one of the biggest issues of standardized testing is that it relies so heavily on reading. So if your comprehension is a struggle, then testing will be a struggle. Because even math tests, right, require more reading than they used to. Any type of high-stakes testing will be an issue.
So, like, perhaps if we're in the midst of a literacy crisis?
Yeah, that might be a factor.
Okay.
You know.
Well, gee, that's weird.
Okay. So, yeah. That's a problem.
The chips keep stacking up.
Okay. It's so tall. So, Maroon and Tinkin, they looked into the Algebra 1 state test in New Jersey.
Okay.
And so their goal was to determine the predictiveness of community and family demographic variables, which, to boil it down, just means how does your wealth impact a test score, right?
Okay, so this is more about what we were talking about, like how these tests don't tell us what we think they tell us. Okay.
So what they found was not at all surprising. Those households with an income over $200,000 scored much higher than those with a household income under $35,000. And so I have a couple quotes here. So the first quote says this: "Moreover, students with higher family human capital also tend to perform better on standardized tests that are text-based or require reading comprehension because students with more life experiences tend to have larger sight and academically oriented vocabularies."
Family human capital.
Okay. So the term human capital is what researchers use to encompass people's skills. So it's their experiences and abilities that contribute to their potential economic success and skill development. So what they suggest, though, and this is another quote from their study, the Algebra 1 test was not a precise measurement of student mathematic achievement. The student results on the test explained more about the background knowledge the students possessed about the topics on the test than what they had learned in math class. Our results, like the results from numerous other studies on the topic, suggest that increased family capital provides opportunities for students to gain academic background knowledge from collateral learning opportunities that result from varied life experiences. So essentially what they're saying is that the more money you have, the more opportunities to learn you have. And those are all factors in these state tests, because this Algebra 1 state test in New Jersey was less about what they had learned and more about what they already possessed about topics.
Do you think there's any way to control for this factor with standardized testing?
No.
Like, it doesn't really, it seems to me like any standardized test, this kind of thing is always going to be baked in.
the truth of the matter is always going to be that people who have more life experience and more ability to whatever, right, have these options in life are always going to perform better on things like this.
Well, yeah, but I guess what I'm asking is, can we acknowledge that and still have useful data? And I really don't know the answer to that.
Could we still have useful data? Yeah, but the fact that it still hurts children is what makes it difficult for me.
Well, right, but that's the problem with, again, the implementation, like what we do with the test data.
Yeah.
And it seems like the problem, and ESSA kind of tried to rectify some of this, but by and large, we still have a scenario where schools that struggle more it's a punitive regime.
Sure.
The high stakes standardized testing regime is a punitive one. So there are a lot of people who say, no, we need these test scores because we do need to know where students are not being served as well as others.
Yeah.
And we have to have a standardized way of kind of measuring that, but we should use this to inform instructional practices and maybe send more investment to places where students are struggling along these vectors rather than less. I don't know. It just feels like your school is struggling. We're going to therefore close it. I don't know. It seems kind of wild to me to disrupt a school community. I don't know. It just makes me sad. So anyway.
Just something else worth mentioning is that the U.S. has less of a social safety net than European countries when considering childhood poverty levels. Essentially, what they stated in the research was that the U.S. has reduced government support like monetary, labor, fiscal, and health policies. And all of those play a big role as well in this kind of data.
I really want to hear about some of your lived experience with the way these high stakes testing regimes play out.
Regime is such a weird word.
It is a testing regime. Yeah. I want to know, because we hear this phrase teaching to the test all the time. What are the consequences of this on your day-to-day life and the day-to-day life of other people in the education system, not just teachers, but like admins and parents? And what is teaching to the test day to day, and why is it so destructive to your classroom practice?
I would say that the first couple years you have a new test is the worst because you don't have a lot of information or data to work with. And so each year you're trying to scrounge together as much information as you can so that you can make the necessary changes. Now that we've been using the same end of course exams in Ohio for quite a few years, it's become easier to prep for because I've just worked in that type of test, the type of questions or the written responses into units I had already built. So it was more just evolving what I was already teaching to better fit the types of questions that a test like this would ask.
Right. But like in the first place, having to do any of that, how does that either interfere with or support?
It makes a lot more work, for sure. So it's an interference. And also a lot of teachers spend a lot of time trying to say, can I justify still teaching this? And so that's another factor of, do I just need to completely throw something out and put in a new unit to help better prepare students?
So you're absolutely narrowing your curriculum then. This
in a lot of ways, yeah.
This criticism that it causes the curriculum to narrow is 100% accurate then. Okay. So you have to like get rid of other priorities that you would maybe rather teach or think are important for your kids to learn. You have to dispose with those because you have to take time for this preparation.
Rewrite. Yeah, and you also rewrite quizzes, you rewrite essay prompts, you rewrite your rubrics.
So it's time you're investing. It's preparation time in addition to the fact that the kids don't benefit from the other maybe more creative curricular choices that you could have made. You also have to sink in all of this prep time into teaching to the test.
Like I probably wouldn't keep teaching Antigone by Sophocles, but our state test loves Sophocles. And that's a text I have access to. So I keep Sophocles. Could I hit other benchmarks without Sophocles? Yes. He is not required. Could I switch out Caesar for another Shakespeare? Yes. But Caesar has appeared. And so those are the kind of like factors. Like I've completely redone my poetry unit to try to better support the type of poetry that the kids might read on the test.
Is it inherently that the type of stuff that they have to know for the test is less valuable than other things?
No, it's
just more narrow.
It's more narrow and...
Like, do you think it crushes creativity and critical thinking?
I think it can, for sure. The other thing, though, that makes this test difficult is that you have to consider how old the texts are that are being used on it. The pieces that are featured in the end of course exam are all in the public domain now, which means they're how many years old at minimum.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking like present day content. Like we're talking, there's a lot of historical background that has to go into some of the readings of these.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the criticisms that gets leveled at these tests is that they're designed to incorporate texts that are less accessible to modern readers. 100%. And texts that are less accessible to modern readers means you have to like having familiarity with Shakespearean English is just like, I don't know. It's a kind of education that requires a lot of investment for students.
So just because, I mean, I do my best to prep my kids on Shakespeare, but teaching Caesar is not the same as teaching Othello. So, like, even though my students have had experience with Shakespeare, if they're forced to read a Shakespeare from, like, one of the Henrys or whatever, they're still walking into it mostly blind.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Shakespeare, we talked about Shakespeare, teaching Shakespeare. We have a whole episode on it, but, like, it's really hard. Shakespeare's really hard. I actually hard to read and to teach.
I actually picked up a graphic novel done by SparkNotes of Hamlet because I'm thinking about using that with my general 10th graders. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of my summer projects is going to be that to read that graphic novel and see if it's close enough to Shakespeare to do the job, you know. So I'm trying to make him more reachable for general students who are not always college bound. But trying to make Shakespeare approachable is very difficult. So all of this to say, would I still be teaching Shakespeare if this test didn't, you know, whatever? Yes, of course, he's in my standards. But could I switch out Caesar? Probably.
Yeah.
But Caesar is a safe bet.
So you choose a safer bet, which I think...
And I keep Sophocles, and I love Antigone, but 10th graders don't love Antigone.
What would happen, do you think, if you chose a less safe bet?
My data would take a hit for sure. But my classroom might be more fun. So there's that.
I mean, that's the thing that kills
I might
me.
be able to.
Yeah.
The other problem is, though, is that I really love Antigone, and I think Antigone is a great piece.
Yeah.
Because I love who Antigone is.
Yeah, I want to be clear that I love studying even the content that does get tested. Like, it's very interesting for me, but...
There are probably other ways to teach that unit with a more contemporary text or whatever. Maybe like The Hate You Give, or, you know, I'm thinking of other pieces where a female deals with the struggles of family, you know, like not quite as, no one is fighting through what Antigone's family is fighting through, but like.
I think I might be less inclined than you to solve this problem with just like more contemporary texts. And I understand the problem of the inaccessibility of older texts.
Yeah.
But I also feel that we are lacking in critical reading skills and that we should be graduating people who are very capable of reading.
Yeah, me too.
Not contemporary texts. So,
well, sure. But also in my classroom, there are no contemporary texts. So it might be nice to have one.
Yeah, sure.
Like, the most contemporary text that I teach, Maya Angelou's poetry, which is still from the 90s. Most of it in the 80s and the 70s. Other than that, Steinbeck, I wouldn't consider him contemporary. So I actually think it would be nice to give my students an opportunity to learn how to read even the books that they're reading for fun.
Yeah. That's where I think the contemporary texts are the strongest tool.
Yeah.
Is that they engage young people in their own learning.
But that's like, I teach Sophocles because of the language of Sophocles, because these tests love Greek and Roman pieces, and they love those things.
There's definitely there's definitely a preference for Western ideologies and history in these tests, for sure. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Oedipus the King has appeared, you know, so like, because they'll release old practice tests that I can go through with my students, and there's some very ancient stuff on there.
So there isn't really a research consensus about the general effectiveness of high-stakes testing on improving educational outcomes. there is no preponderance of evidence to suggest that it actually improves outcomes. So, given that lack of research support for a high-stakes testing regime, what is keeping us stuck where we are?
Money.
Explain what that
Money.
means.
I mean,
Why
these
money?
test corporations, these groups, they're lobbying states to buy into whatever their educational group is to give those tests for. I mean, there's millions.
So what,
and
like
millions
Pearson is campaign funding every senator and whatever? Is that the deal?
I mean, they certainly agree to these groups that they will use their tests so long as these corporations are still being paid by the state to, that's how it's going to keep working.
Yeah, okay, but here's my thing. Can we still have an educational system that includes standardized testing but without the high stakes baggage? Because I feel that's what we need.
I don't know if I can tell you right now that if you told a student that they have to come in and take a 3-hour test and it does nothing for them, but it helps the school or helps your teacher, I do not know that everybody would show up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed ready to test. Because a lot of us don't like to test. So the thing that makes kids actually work towards a test is that it is a requirement for their graduation, which is the high-stakes portion of it. So
you're saying that the high stakes part itself is what makes kids show up? Like what makes them engaged in it?
Yes.
And that's what makes... But okay, so you're saying there's no way to have reliable standardized test data if you don't put a high stake on it for a student.
I don't know how reliable it would be.
But why do you think it's more reliable when the high stakes happen rather than... Like, wouldn't a more reliable test of somebody's performance be in their, like, everyday test taking? Like, in their day-to-day... The stuff that they don't think is important. Isn't that a more accurate measure of
but if we're talking about a test...
No, you're talking about a high stakes standardized test. I'm talking about a low stakes standardized test where that factor that you're talking about.
What does a low stakes test look like?
Well, I mean, that's kind of my question for you.
Well, I don't know, obviously,
so
because...
Well, there are ways of having, like, benchmarking tests that happen more frequently. They're used to measure student progress against specific learning goals and standards. They're more like checkpoints than this high stakes, like, this is something I have to do to graduate kind of test.
I can tell you, my students do not value learning. They value grades and scores. So if they are told that this benchmark is just to see where they are,
they're going to blow it off?
Yes.
Okay, but so here's the thing still. Even if they blow it off, I still think the data is valuable. Because if they blow it off, everybody will blow it off in a uniform manner. Like, this factor that you're talking, removing the high stakes thing just means that we're probably going to adjust down the scores across the board for everybody all at once, right?
Okay.
Hypothetically, in your scenario.
Okay.
But over time, then the new normal of those test scores would still indicate to us the things we need it to indicate to us about meeting standards, right?
Yeah. Maybe. I would have students flat out not do anything. And they might be some of the brightest in my room.
Right. But I guess I'm saying if we take away the punitive effects of that, then we can still see that, like, in your classroom, these kids are checking out. We can still see that, and we can still act on that by, like, maybe specially investing time with those disengaged students or whomever.
But those are students that could be very well engaged in class when it's for a grade, but when they're doing something that is not a reward, like, is not rewarded to them for their hard work.
Yeah.
Like, what you are still getting at is a person who appreciates the learning that they have done.
Yeah.
And that is not what education does. It does not appreciate learning.
That's really sad.
So if you want to do something like a benchmark test, you would also have to shift the ways in which you're grading things or make it pass fail or whatever. Because I can tell you, students will sleep through anything. They don't want to do anything they don't have to do. They'll ask me when I pass out something to them, is this for a grade? And if I say no, it's usually not going to return to my classroom. Mm-hmm. Now, in my head, I know that what I'm doing with that paper is important learning, but that isn't what they value. So we are talking in circles about something that, while it would be nice to perfect the way that this could work, and then we would have, like, I agree, but we have to start with making students value learning, and they don't. Mm-hmm. So these types of tests are not going to be helpful until we value learning.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all.
I mean, I'm on board with this.
I think that's it. Like, so, I hear your ideas and your thoughts.
No, I'm not. I don't have ideas. No, I'm asking you. I'm asking you questions. How do we get from point A to point B? And you're saying all of this stuff has to happen. And if that's true, that's true. And I kind of agree with you that the benchmark testing is only going to be marginally useful unless students are engaged in their own learning.
I mean, if it's a row of check marks, they're going to be like, check, 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 I did it. And we're like, so it's very hard.
So taking away the high stakes out of the education system has to happen at the system level, not just with these standardized tests.
And honestly, the high stakes portion of the testing might be the only part of the accuracy of it.
I still disagree with you there. I still disagree that we're getting a more accurate picture when we put students on the pedestal of this is required for your graduation success. I think that causes students to act abnormally, which means that it's not as accurate a measure of their actual learning. Like they're on their best behavior. Doesn't it reflect
what they're capable of, but maybe what they don't exert every day?
Yeah.
Or are you saying it's a lucky test day?
No. I guess I'm just saying to know accurately, like the sort of day-to-day learning that students are accomplishing, we shouldn't be making it some special standout thing. We should be looking at what they're doing in their day-to-day. Because the standout special thing is only a small snapshot.
Right. So maybe the better option would be to take whatever the data is from the high-stakes testing and find some formula to combine it with 9 weeks grades or something like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe that would be a better look into them as a student and not just who woke up late, who was sick, who had a surprisingly lucky day, like whatever.
Well, there are a lot of people who advocate for a more holistic student evaluation system too. Like, oh, let's do portfolio learning. Let's do all this stuff that requires a lot more effort than a standardized test to evaluate. But
there's still going to be plenty of students who, I mean, all of us have students every year who don't pass our class. Mm-hmm. So it's still not going to...
Okay, well, let me just shift yet again to say, okay, let's just say we're in this new world, or we're moving toward this new world where we are decoupling the high stakes, both from like the grading system, like what you're talking about, and from the testing system. In that world, how do we hold educators accountable for serving students well? Because we have to recognize that a student's academic and test scores, that performance is not always going to be the best indicator of their learning. Mm-hmm. So given that fact, how do we hold teachers accountable?
Mm-hmm. I've never had to think about it.
No. I'm just like handing you the paintbrush and saying, paint your own world. Like, what is the best possible scenario that you would think of?
In a perfect world, I would not have to be held accountable for teaching. Like, it would be trusted that educators educate.
Yeah, but they don't always, right? I mean, I hear you.
I know, but
I have had not great teachers in my life, and they were allowed to continue to be not great teachers for a really long time.
Yeah.
And that's, like, I hear you that I think in a perfect world, district leaders wouldn't hire those kinds of teachers.
Yeah.
But we do not have that world.
I mean... But even still, it's very hard to get rid of a teacher. So, like, even by the current standards, it's hard to get rid of teachers. It's very hard to get rid of teachers. Also, there are no other teachers, so we don't really get rid of them all that often.
Sure.
It has to be pretty egregious.
There are many reasons why it is difficult and why we don't want to get rid of teachers. But I guess I'm just saying we still need to be able to say, hey, you're actually not good at your job, and here's why.
Yeah.
How do we do that without high-stakes testing?
Yeah. I can't even imagine a world in which that isn't the case. Do I write an essay at the end of the year about how my year went with data? No, I can't use that. I don't know.
Well, what would you think about a peer review system?
No.
Yeah, everybody always says no. Why is that?
Because there's a bunch of bad teachers.
Oh, okay.
Also, like...
What about student feedback?
No.
Why?
Because the stuff that they hang on to that they're still mad about is remarkable.
Yeah, but okay, let's say we're going to take it with a grain of salt and realize that teenagers are petty sometimes and immature.
Okay.
Because that's just the nature of a teenager. It's fine. I still think you could probably control for that factor. You don't think there's anything, especially if we move toward a system where we're less obsessed with grades and less obsessed with test scores. You don't think in that system there would be value in student feedback for teacher performance?
There definitely could be then. I used to have students fill out feedback for me, and I stopped. Because it was a chance for them to say a bunch of stuff that they would never have said to my face.
It was just demoralizing.
And it didn't actually do anything to make me better. I
just
had
like
students,
unfiltered venting from teenagers.
I had students shred me on my feedback form that I chose to give them, that I didn't have to turn into the school, that they were still mad at me from an incident in February where the 4 of them got in trouble by me because they like threw food. And all that I said to them was, don't throw food. And they were still mad that I asked them not to throw food in May.
Okay.
So I'm not super confident that student feedback is going to be that helpful.
Okay, fair.
Because they were mad months later that I told them not to throw food in a classroom.
Okay, let me back up to this.
So it seems unlikely that they'll value what I'm doing in the education realm because they're so mad that I told them not to throw an apple or whatever they did.
That's fair. I'm not saying that there aren't going to be bad doses of feedback in these kinds of situations, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to use the worst examples of a feedback system as indicative of how well that feedback system will go.
And I think they could be useful.
Can I ask you about the peer thing?
Yeah.
Because I hear what you're saying. You don't want to be reviewed by people whose professional opinions you don't trust as much. I get that. But don't you think that if you were conducting a whole system of this, where you had an opportunity for those kind of errant cases to work themselves out, if you had a system where a whole bunch of your peers were reviewing you, then you know that these aberrant things that pop up are more like probably personally motivated, right?
How would they know how to review me?
Well, they're all educators.
Do they come into my room and observe me?
Yeah.
Like, I would have to go observe my entire staff for a period throughout the year?
Well, I mean, I don't know how it would be. It probably wouldn't be.
Because I can tell you, if I know I'm about to get reviewed or evaluated, most of us would probably gussy up the performance for the day.
Yeah, I understand that. I hear you.
Which isn't the right answer,
but, saying,
but it does happen.
I'm saying if you were all trusted to review one another and to speak to one another's strengths and weaknesses honestly, you would get some, I'm sure you would get some petty workplace drama responses, but you would also, I think for the most part, get useful feedback that was way more informed because it's from a peer educator than you would from an administrator. No offense to administrators currently in your building, but like those people are no longer in the context of the day-to-day work of classroom teaching. And I guess I would find it personally more valuable. It's like if I'm going to have to be observed and evaluated, I would rather that happen from someone who has made it their profession, as I have, to teach.
We used to have to do each semester a peer evaluation. And we would just like write up what we saw. And there was like a form. And it was like, what were they doing? What would you use in your own classroom? How would you change it to fit your curriculum? Whatever. It was fine.
I mean, that doesn't sound like the most useful way to do peer review, to be fair, but it
wasn't. It was just a reflection, I guess I should call it, not a review, because they never saw what I wrote. It was just for me to think about what I saw.
Interesting. It just feels like there could be some valuable data there, I think. But you're right in that you have to have established trust within the educational community to pull that off really well.
I just also hesitate to give teachers more work.
Yes.
And evaluating peers is more work. And I don't have time to do what I do.
No.
Let alone evaluating
I understand.
peers.
We have to dream big here, though. We have to imagine that if we're changing things in this way, that you would also receive the support required to pull it off.
Yeah.
And I know that that is hardly ever the case in practice in public education. But all of those constraints being removed, if we were really doing this in a way that was designed to truly serve students, what would we be doing? That's what I'm asking. And you're right, we would be dedicating time to this problem because we actually care about it instead of just checking a standardized test box.
Sure. I'm not opposed to the peer review system. I'm sure that someday when I'm tougher, I'll go back to student feedback. My shell is very soft.
I mean, I don't blame you for not wanting. Hard. I don't blame you for not wanting to hear teenagers complain about you. And I get it.
It's just it did not make me better.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't help. Is there a way in which it could? Certainly. But with teenagers, you really walk a line of safety with them.
What if you dedicated a friend on your faculty, so like a fellow teacher? Mm-hmm. What if you dedicated one of those people to receive the student surveys and filter out the stuff that's just shamelessly hurtful and try to distill it?
I don't think I would want someone else to read it without context to understand what those things could be.
Nobody?
Are there people? Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying, what if you had latitude to pick whoever, like somebody you actually trusted?
Sure. That would be fine.
And then they could filter out the stuff that is just the hurtful noise and give you useful nuggets. And maybe there aren't any useful nuggets, but they would be the one to determine that and absorb the brute force.
But then
of
I would
teenagers.
want to know what it was. I can't operate on that. For some people, that might work. I'd rather just know it all. And maybe that would work fine, but I would hate that.
The good, the bad, and the
ugly.
ugly.
I would hate that because I'd be like, tell me what they said. I hate surprises. I hate secrets. I hate all that stuff. So I am not the person for that.
You're pro-transparency.
I am.
Okay.
Like, if I could wrap Christmas gifts in clear paper, I would. Like, I don't like it. So, I'm telling the truth, too.
We're just going to order you some rolls of saran wrap.
I just need saran wrap with bows. And on the top, I'll be like, you're going to love this, and Sharpie. Next.
Fill in the blank.
This is where you write in to hello@1601.com. You tell us the answer. We send you stickers.
Yeah. Or even if you don't tell us the answer, we'll still send you stickers.
Or if you just write us an email, I'll send you stickers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's start with last episode's fill in the blank question. This organization was an American labor union of shoe workers formed in Wisconsin in 1867. It soon reached a membership of 50,000 or more, largely in the Northeast. However, it was poorly organized and faded away by 1874. They fought to prevent the introduction of new machinery and worked to keep immigrant labor out of the workforce. And that was the Order of the Knights of St. Crispin.
Okay, this week, we're releasing this in late May of 2024.
Yes.
So we are quickly approaching Memorial Day. So Memorial Day in the United States was first observed on May 30th, 1868, as a way to commemorate the lives lost during the American Civil War. After World War I, Memorial Day became the occasion to remember all those who died in America's wars. In 1971, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act, which established that Memorial Day was to be commemorated on the last Monday of May. When it originally started, Memorial Day was called something else. What was its original name?
Okay. Are we ready to talk about what we learned? We do this at the end of every show. We do a roundup of what we've learned in the last couple of weeks just to keep things fresh.
I have two things.
Yes.
So, first of all, a previous episode we talked about the science of reading, right?
Yes.
I got more information on the classes I'm going to have to be taking. So originally, the way that I read it, I assumed that the stipend we were being given was to go towards the cost of the courses. Because I made a comment that was like, I get $1,200, it'll probably cost $1,500, right? I thought we were being given money to choose a course to take that fulfilled the requirement. That is not the case. We are to take courses on the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce towards the science of reading. And once we have completed that work, if we complete it by June of next school year, or after next school year, so 25, we receive a $1,200 stipend.
Okay.
So I will...
So you don't have to pay for the coursework.
I will take the course for free, but I am forced to take it. And if I complete it in a year, I get a stipend.
Okay. That's not as bad as
it's not as bad. And also, if you're a current teacher who's working on your 5-year plan or whatever like that, you should submit this to your ippy dippy committees because they should.
What is that?
It's your professional development groups at school that pre-approve or approve what professional development you do to go towards the renewal of your school license. So,
and you call those what?
They're called they're IPDP committees, but we all call them the ippy dippies.
Okay.
Make sure you submit those hours and those classes towards it. You should earn CEUs towards the renewal of your license.
Continuing education credits.
Okay, here's what I really learned other than that.
Okay.
One of my really good friends at school has a family-owned beef farm. And she sent me a Snapchat of the bulls, and they were being, like, super loud. She was like, this guy won't shut up. And he was just, like, all yapping. All kinds of noise, super loud. He had one of those huge rings in his nose. And I've always seen those, and I was always like, why do they have a ring in their nose? Like, what's it do? Do they have, like, a deviated septum? Do they, like, have sinus issues? Like, what's this guy going through? She said that the pressure, when you pull on that, makes them obey you. So the reason, like, that bull that she was sending me videos of, he weighs more than, like, 1,400 pounds. So, like, even the strongest farm girl or people are not going to have a great time moving a 1,400-pound animal. So she was talking about how you put those rings in their nose because you can kind of guide them that way, and they're more likely to do as you wish.
Interesting.
She said you can also halter break them, which is even better because then you have a lot more control. But those rings are really common because if you can get a hold of the ring, it doesn't feel good. So they're gonna walk with you because they don't want their nose to be pulled.
Makes sense.
All right, what'd you learn?
Okay, well, I was sick and I'm still recovering, and so I spent more time than I should have laying in bed and scrolling through social media. And in doing so, though, I came across this video of a kid who cracked open a nice tall can of energy drink. It was like cherry energy drink of some sort. And he poured it in a pre-made pie crust and put some other stuff in it and stuck it in the oven, baked it, and it came out as this kind of flat looking like custardy pie thing. And I was like, that looks gross. But then I went to the comments and everyone was like, oh yeah, that's like water pie. A Depression era recipe called water pie. And I'm like, this cannot be real. But I went and looked it up, and water pie is indeed a thing. And it actually made a resurgence during COVID because people started baking with the limited, like when supply chains were disrupted and people like we didn't have money.
We brought back Depression era desserts during COVID. What does that tell you?
Yeah. But the depressing part of that aside, I did think it was interesting to learn about this. And I don't know if you remember this, but I said I was going to ask my grandma about this. And she did know what they were. And she said she'd had them and remember them being good.
What'd she call it? A water pie?
It's called water pie. You make it with water, or I guess in this kid's case, cherry energy drink. Or you can make it with Sprite, apparently.
I feel like Sprite would be good.
Flour, sugar, butter, and vanilla extract. And it creates this rich filling with like a custard-like texture. And it's supposed to be like a smooth, creamy dessert.
So you have the pie crust and then you mix those things with water or whatever. Yeah. Put them in and bake them. Sounds good.
Yeah, it does sound good. I just had never heard of it before. Water pie. That's what I learned about.
I'll ask my parents about that. Water pie. You gonna make one?
I did think about trying it. It didn't, like, the way people are describing it, it sounds good.
I bet that Christmas Sprite, that cranberry Sprite or whatever, I bet that would be really good.
It was like it was cranberry ginger ale, I think.
Yeah, I feel like that would be good. Okay. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Once I'm happier during summer.
All right.
See you then.
Thanks for listening. Bye. Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. It's almost summer. And I told Chelsea I don't want to think about teaching for, I think I said 2 weeks. I think I would settle on like 3 days.
Okay. We'll take a 3-day break.
Thank you.
At minimum.
Literally minimum. I think I'm just gonna like have a buzzer, and anytime you say like a hot education word, I'll be like meh, meh, and it will just absolutely delete. It'll be like Men in Black, your memory, and we'll just move on.
I don't
Like
know what
completely
I'm gonna do
separate.
for 3 days. I'm just gonna be sitting in a daze.
I'll have Pavloved you into silence.
Hey, did you hear about this bee? Stare, blank stare.
Blank stare, and me just laughing.
Hey, I'm gonna send you this article.
No.
Blank stare.
My phone blocks it out. Yeah, like I was thinking like on Twitter, like blocking like education and school.
Yeah, you need
and
that for me, for real life.
I don't think you would speak. I
For
think all
humans.
you would say is food,
Food, drink, sleep,
dog.
dog.
I would be living with a caveman. I would be dealing with a caveman for like days if that was the point. Watch TV. No Abbott Elementary.
TV. No, Abbott Elementary.